An emergency national cabinet meeting will take place on Wednesday in a bid to address the growing issue of domestic violence against women. The issue has been elevated following a number of women who've been allegedly murdered at the hands of men around the country, and the numbers are too high. Joining me now is Nationals leader David Littleproud. David, thanks so much for your time. We've seen rallies across the weekend. We know the Prime Minister is holding an emergency meeting on Wednesday. I mean, what else can be done?
Yeah, and I think this isn't just governments that need to fix this. Society needs to fix this. We need to stand up and be sure and loud and proud about the fact that we've got to do more, and that starts at home. And we can all make a difference, not just governments. And that's particularly not just about the quantum of money we're spending, but how we're spending that money. Making sure that there isn't crossover between state and federal governments, that it's not just about the traditional programs of the emergency and the recovery piece, but it's about the prevention and intervention from early ages of our children right through to make sure that there is respect brought it back into society. And I think that's what we're missing. But the fact that these rallies took place is a clear message from the Australian people that we've had enough. We should be proud of the fact that so many Australians stood up and said, enough is enough, let's do something about this. And I think the time for talk is over. The time for action is now. And it's important that there is bipartisan support on this. But we need to act swiftly. There's been money announced and promised, people being put on the ground, but we haven't seen them. They've simply got to be done. And you need to look at this in a bespoke model as well, because the needs of regional Australia is different to that in the cities. And we need to empower local communities. And you saw the local communities right across this country that were empowered over the weekend that have their own bespoke solution. And that is where the money should be spent.
Do you have any advice, sympathy, otherwise for the Prime Minister? You've seen there's been a bit of controversy about him speaking or not speaking or being invited to speak at this rally in Canberra yesterday.
He was tone deaf, regardless of whether he was asked to speak or not. That's not the point to make at a rally when it was about a young lady, Sarah Williams, who had the courage of her own convictions to come forward and organise that rally. If he had issues about whether he was invited to speak or not, it's not to make it public in front of the people that were there, the hundreds of thousands of people that were there. And when Sarah became emotionally distraught for the Prime Minister to continue on, he was tone deaf. I mean, I get we're all angry that we've got to this juncture, but as Prime Minister, it's your responsibility to lead your nation, not to fight it, to actually stand up and not to make a petty political point at the expense of a brave woman who has come forward and led her community. That's not how political leaders should carry themselves, nor particularly the Prime Minister. I have no sympathy for him whatsoever. If he had issues about whether he was invited or not, making it public in front of all those people was not the forum to do it. He could have had those conversations in private and he got what he deserved. But it's important now that he focuses on outcomes, on the outcomes that Australians expect of their political leaders, and he does it with respect.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister and he copped criticism, I thought rightly so at the time as well, for not even turning up to a rally, then going into Parliament and saying essentially that, you know, we're a great democracy and protests like that in other nations would be met with bullets. That was also tone deaf at the time. So I guess Anthony Albanese learnt a lesson from that and did show up and wanted to show his support. But you're saying he didn't do it in the right way?
Well, understand the event you're at and the opportunity, and whether there's been a miscommunication between the organisers and his office, then that's not a point to prosecute it at a public rally. Show that you respect the organisers, the courage of their conviction. For Sarah Williams to organise this as part of her community speaks volumes about her, not the Prime Minister and the way that he handled some petty argument whether he was asked to speak or not. Move on. Understand there is a greater good here. And sometimes it's important politicians just turn up and listen and learn rather than just shout and speak.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I would also say and maybe that is the answer then, David, that he should have, turned up. He didn't need to be a guest speaker. But if you are holding a rally at Parliament House, you do that at that venue for a reason, right?
Oh, and it's about the power of that message. The fact that Sarah Williams had organised this to be at Parliament House, the seat of our democracy, what should be one of our most sacred buildings that underpins our whole society, that should be treated with the respect, particularly of the office of Prime Minister. And he just hasn't understood that. And because he felt as though there was undue criticism of his government, he felt the need to come forward and to push himself forward to speak. But to make a point of whether he was invited or not to speak wasn't necessary. Just understand the moment you're in and the passion and the pride that these people have put in coming forward, and respect it. That's what you should encourage in our fellow Australians. Something as serious as this, for them to have the courage of their conviction to create this and to generate the support around the nation, which they have done. I take my hat off to them.
What does it show when this Prime Minister and the previous one haven't got it right? I mean, is there a real disconnect to what women and men are trying to say and what political leaders are hearing?
I think there is, and I think you've got to be honest. And I've been upfront about some of the criticism I've given of Scott Morrison in the past, and I think he got that wrong. He got those issues wrong, and the Australian people judged him accordingly. But it's important as political leaders. I mean, I'm on a tour out through Western Queensland, and this is just as prevalent out here, where, I'm last night at the restaurant talking to locals about these rallies. It means a lot to a little town like Windora of, a couple hundred people, just as much as it does in capital cities. And they're horrified of the stories they're hearing. But it is important that we understand it's not just governments that can solve this. We all have to, and particularly men. We've got to have the courage to call out bad behaviour or any inkling of language of those that we associate with, call them out, that it's not on, because that is where that slippery slope starts. And particularly we need to start this respect back in schools and at home. As parents, we've all got that responsibility. We can't abrogate our responsibilities to the government for everything, but there are families that don't have the stability at home where there's not. That's where we need that early intervention and education piece about making sure that we set the standards within our society, because unfortunately, the victims at the moment are women. Are women right across this nation, whether be in the city or in the regions, that need protection, and it is now time to galvanise all this anger, all this passion about getting action. And, I stand committed to giving whatever support in a bipartisan way to achieve that. But we need to listen, we need to learn from these women and these communities and have local solutions right across this country, because what might work in Melbourne won't work in Windora or Roma or Charleville. We need to listen to the locals because they know best.
Yep. I think you're right, and we can't expect government to fix this alone because it is just too big of an issue. David, before we let you go, you would have seen the Grattan Institute report about concerns about transitioning to renewable energy. I'm sure you were nodding along as you were reading that particular piece this morning.
Oh, well, I mean, when the Grattan Institute, a left-leaning think tank, is criticising the Albanese government for this reckless race to 82% renewables and then to an all-renewables approach, and the impacts it's having on the reliability and the affordability, you've got to step up and say you've got it wrong. I wrote to the Prime Minister when I became Leader of the Nationals. I was pragmatic and I said I went to his Jobs and Skills Summit because I wanted regional Australia to have a voice. And I wrote to him and said, let's now have a National Energy Summit. Let's get everyone in and let's plan this properly. Let's not just race into this where there's unintended consequences, where we're ripping up prime agricultural land, destroying native environment to do all this. Plan it properly and make sure that we have an energy mix that gives us the reliability, affordability, while reducing our actual overall emissions. That's common sense, and that's what the Nationals have offered to the Prime Minister. We'll continue to offer to anyone that wants to listen, but we are going down a path that is hurting Australians, not just potentially in reliability, but also in costs. So just show some political leadership, pull up, pause, and let's plan and get this right. My hand's out. I'm ready to be constructive, as I've proved the Nationals have been since coming into opposition. I think it's a far more important conversation that all of Australians get to say, not just the ideological view of Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese being shoved down our throats. That's costing us a lot more than what it should.
David, good to talk to you, especially from Windora, I might say. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.